welcome to the Figma for EDU monthly workshop. My name is Miggy, and for the next hour or so, we're going to be walking through some Figma basics. We do want to highlight that Figma, FigJam, Figma Slides, Dev Mode, the entire suite of Figma products is fully free for educators and students. You can find out more at figma.education. This workshop here is called Figma from Scratch. Figma from Scratch. Yeah, this workshop here is called Figma from Scratch, Unstructured to Structured Design. And we're going to be covering these concepts. So we're going to be covering the things that you can do in Figma when you are just getting started, when you're roughing out your ideas, when you're just working free form, when you're in that flow state, putting stuff together. So we're going to cover all of the different primitive elements in Figma that you can put together to make a design, whether you're going to be designing an app or you're designing a social media post. Let's say you're just letting your imagination run wild. We're going to talk about how to engage in Figma in an unstructured way. But then we're going to talk about how to structure your designs as you begin collaborating and working with others. This is where the concept of design systems and components come from. So we're going to touch upon how you go from free form to a bit more structure, and then using that structure, how you can prototype your ideas. So just give a hint, a demonstration of seeing on how to make your designs a little more interactive. And then we're going to talk about examining your designs through a development minded lens, right? So we're going to enter dev mode. We're going to look at that to take a look at the stuff that we've created. So then this way you can understand how you bridge the gap from design to development, whether you're making a website, whether you're making an app, or you're going to be working with a developer to make that happen. We're going to cover these 4 concepts today and look at that from a beginner standpoint. So let's go. All right. So this is the file that we are working with. And before we get started, there is one shortcut that I like to highlight for folks to help them understand how to search for things a bit more easily in Figma. This is called the Quick Actions menu. The Quick Actions menu can be triggered by using Command K or Control K on your keyboard. The reason that I like the Quick Actions menu is it gives you the ability to search for all of the functions and features in Figma. So if I wanted to place an image, for example, I can type in place image and I can see place image. If I want to type in keyboard shortcuts, so keyboard shortcuts, I'm going to have the option for keyboard shortcuts, and that will present me with a pane that will allow me to browse and view various keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to be highlighting a number of keyboard shortcuts today, and sometimes it could be intimidating to hear all of those letters and characters jumbled together. But what I wanted to do is let you know that this is a great way to explore Figma to find out what features are available. You can also access keyboard shortcuts by coming down here to the bottom right, Help and Resources, and then going to keyboard shortcuts. That will bring this panel up. And then as you trigger the keyboard shortcuts, they will be highlighted. So as I'm going through here, you can see Open Dev Mode is Shift D. I haven't pressed that yet. So when I press Shift D, right, in my keyboard shortcuts pane, it will now have been triggered. So yeah, if I go to Tools, View, Open Dev Mode, it's now blue. So as you triggered those keyboard shortcuts, it lets you know which one you did. So if you have that completionist mindset, you might want to have a stab at trying to do all of the keyboard shortcuts. All right. Let's see. I'm seeing some folks are having difficult screen sharing. Alex, are folks able to see the
that's only
screen?
one person. Would folks in the chat just let us know if they can see the screen share?
All right,
Okay,
brilliant.
looks
Thank you
like
so
folks are
much.
confirming. So if you can't see Miggy's screen, you're just going to go ahead and reconfigure the way that your Zoom is displayed. So you can do that in your own personal setting.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love the collaboration here, everybody working with one another to make sure that, you know, we're all in the same space. So first things first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Figma space. You might notice this middle area here. This is the canvas. As you add objects to the canvas, you will see them visually represented here. Over on the left, there are layers. Every object that exists on the canvas will be represented in the layers panel. Just above here are the pages, and you'll notice that as I'm clicking down through each of these pages, you can kind of see what's there. So I am currently going to be on the example page. You can just move your mouse over here, click on that example page. Now, any object, anything that I select on the canvas, you will see the properties for over here on the right. So the thing that lives on the canvas, it's going to have properties like its position, its scale, its color, right? When you have text, it's going to be the font size, it's going to be the font. So all of those things can be changed in the right-hand panel. So this is going to be referred to as the design panel. So as we work, the sensor area is the canvas. It's sort of the visual everything. On the left, you have the pages. Each page has a different canvas. Just beneath that are the layers. And here's a pro tip. If you want to find something and you're looking for it in the layers panel, you don't know where it is on the canvas, you could just double click on it and it'll take you right to that object. So let's say I'm over here and I double click on that monthly workshop frame. By double clicking on it, it will take me right there. So that's going to be your first Miggy pro tip for today. All right. So now as we start working here, right, we're going to begin with unstructured design. So I see someone mentioned that Command K is create link. You'll notice that I'm currently working in the redesigned Figma UI 3. So when you're in the redesigned Figma UI 3, the shortcut key is going to be Command K. So if that's not working for you, hit Command P, and that will also be the quick actions menu. That shortcut is deprecated. So once again, Command P, or you'll see a little icon down here. It might be different if AI features are disabled for you, but just by pulling up that actions menu, that's going to give you the ability to work there, right? And it's going to be Control K in Windows. We're going to begin with this concept of unstructured design, and this is a method by which you can examine the primitive objects that you can add to Figma. So these are like the most basic things, and I always like starting off with shapes. Shapes can be added to Figma down here in the toolbar, and you'll see that there's a number of different shapes. The most basic of which you are going to work with can be the rectangle, the line, or an ellipse. And you'll notice when I go down here too, I can see the shortcut keys for each one of those objects. When I click ellipse, I can click and draw, add it to the canvas. I am going to hold the shift key when adding it to the canvas, and what that will do is just constrain the width and the height together. So once again, just that concept, pretty simple. We're going to add a rectangle to the canvas. I'm going to hold the shift key. I'm going to click from top left to bottom right, and what I'm doing is I'm adding it directly to the canvas. Once I add it, you will notice on the left here is the rectangle tool. So when you add those objects, it gets added. Once that object is selected, over here on the right are the different properties. So we've added a rectangle to the canvas. I look over here, I can change that fill color to whatever it is that I want. So these shapes provide the ability to create graphic like objects. So if I were to create a circle, this circle has a little dot here, which is the arc tool, and will allow me to change certain set special properties with it. So this is the arc tool, gives me the ability to turn an ellipse or a circle into something akin to a pie chart. And once again, those properties then become available over here. So this is a basic concept that you can begin to work on, where you are adding things to the canvas, you select them, and then if you need to change their properties, you can look here in the right side panel to begin to adjust them. If I wish to adjust the width and height, I can basically move my mouse here. I can type in the values, or you'll notice I can hover over it and scrub it. Okay, so we're going to be pretty familiar with this concept. You're going to be adding a lot of rectangles to the canvas, and that is just shapes. Next up is going to be text. When you press the T key, down here is the type tool, right? When you press T and you click on the canvas, it's going to give you the ability to type in text. So I can say hello world, right? And this text object as well is going to have a number of different properties that you can modify. So just with the shapes, you have the position, you have various transform properties. So if I want to rotate it as well, you can begin to modify those properties on the right-hand side, and you can see the text here on the left. So as you dig into working with the text, you're going to explore more and more properties. So when you first begin, you might be changing the font. So I could change this to, let's say, Hello Holtwood 1, right? And the fonts that we have here, these are coming from a library that gets uploaded directly from Google Fonts. In order to add your own custom fonts, you can either use the Figma desktop app or use the Figma font helper. So if you go to figma.com, there's a downloads page where you can download these. It's an external application that lets you use external fonts. But there are going to be a number of fonts that are freely available to use within Figma as you're working. So as you dig into typography, get more involved, you will notice that there is also an advanced panel where you have additional type settings. I like to demonstrate this because the typography nerd in me absolutely loves features such as hanging punctuation. So if I was to add in some quotes here and I want that quote to hang outside in the margin, when I enable that, right, it will allow that to happen, meaning the text will be on the outside. So if you are teaching a graphic design class, you're really big into typography, if you're a fan of Ellen Lupton's book, wait, what is it? It's Type is Art. No, I can't even remember. It's like Ellen Lupton's typography book where she talks about hanging punctuation. You will be teaching with type. I think it was thinking with type. It's thinking with type. Thank you so much, Leah. Yeah, it's an absolute, there's a third edition now. It is fantastic. So a lot of the concepts that you find in that book, you can manipulate and work in with Figma, such as grids and things like hanging punctuation, lettering case. You can even apply ligatures, ordinals, and even engage with different typographic values. So I like to highlight that there. But just really quick, the thing that I want y'all to be most aware of when working with type over here are the different ways that type field is managed, right? So you have three options. You have auto width, right? When you have auto width, the type just goes on in one single line until you hit a return. But then you also have auto height. Auto height means that the text box will grow as your text grows. Fixed is different. Fixed is when you want to constrain type, you want a set bounding box around your type. This becomes helpful once again when you take a look at this advanced type settings. Down here, you will, if I just go to the basics, you'll see truncate text. I can truncate that text box with a fixed box. So I'm going to recap that concept really quick. The majority of the time, what you want to do with your type is set it to auto height. If you're working on website design, app design, you're going to be working with this concept in Figma known as auto layout. Chances are 9 times out of 10, you want to set it to auto height. If you draw a text field out and just start typing, the default is going to be a fixed size. I'm going to recommend that you set it to auto height. An easy way to do that. Here's my shortcut. Just double click on the bottom here and it will set to auto height. If you want just a single line field of text, let's say you're designing, fields or input fields, and it just needs to be an input field, just double click on the right-hand side and it will become auto width. The reason I'm spending a little more time with this is because this is one of those things that people often overlook when first working with Figma. So I do want to draw your attention. Be mindful of the behavior of your text field. Other design applications have similar things where they refer to it as area type or line type. So this one is going to be either auto width, where it just kind of goes on in one direction horizontally. And then there's going to be auto height, where you're kind of defining the width and then the text flows down. All right. So next up, images. The way that images work in Figma. Images are fills on shapes. And what I mean by that is when I select this image here, you're going to see over here on the right, it's a fill. So any shape that you have in Figma can have a color fill, or it could be a shape fill. So I'm going to draw in a rectangle. I'm going to come over here. I can choose an image fill, and I can upload an image from my computer. And later on, I will show you other ways of adding those images to your shapes. Graphics in Figma, Figma is vector based, so you can create graphics in the same way that you've created graphics in other vector applications. So all of the shapes that we've created, they are graphics. And so if we take a look at this object here, you'll see sort of its representation in that field. One of the key ways to see a graphic in Figma is to hit, I'm going to hit Command Y. It's going to be Control Y on Windows. And so you'll actually see the way that that graphic is constructed. Vector graphics are innately infinitely large, infinitely small. So when I scale this up and down, let's hit the scale key. I'm going to press K to scale this up and down. You can see that that graphic is going to retain its fidelity when I do that. And to scale in Figma down here, scale T, we'll be talking about that in just a moment. All right, so I know I've covered a few concepts here thus far. So shapes, text, image, graphics. And what I want to do is give you an overview of where you're headed, right? So these are the primitives, but I'm going to take a quick stab and head over here to the right to show you how the unstructured aspects of Figma, the unstructured elements, will eventually become something like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate over. If you are having trouble navigating, you can use your touchpad. If you have a mouse and keyboard in front of you and you're like, I don't really know how to move around, I hold down the space bar, it brings up this little hand and allows you to drag around that space. When I hit the command key and I scroll with my mouse wheel, I could zoom in and out. If you have a touchpad, you can use the pinch gesture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over here and I'm just going to give you a sense of how these elements are brought in together. And then we're going to head back and talk about, going from those primitive elements to something that is a bit more finished. I'm going to select this frame over on the far right. So if you look on this page, if I zoom all the way out, we were in this unstructured design area. Over here is the prototyping and dev mode area. I'm going to press Shift Space Bar, and that's going to pull this up into a preview in a device to give me a sense of how graphics, how text, how imagery can be used to eventually build out a design in the structure of like an app design. Right? So you can begin to see, okay, we have type, we have the image fill. You might even see that we have this little drop shadow here. We'll talk about that. And the way that this is structured and constructed is going to be using a way to using components, which allows us to put them together. I saw a question here earlier where someone was asking about, well, how do I put my shapes with my text? We're going to talk about, kind of making these components that allow you to reuse the same element over and over again within a design. So, right, once again, you can select this, hit Shift Space Bar, and that'll give you a preview. If you want to, if you're not a shortcut person and you want to see exactly how to actuate that, you can select the frame, come over here to the top right, click this little down arrow right here, not the play button, but just down here, and you have these two options. You have presentation prototype mode and you have preview prototype mode. And what I'm doing is I'm clicking that preview prototype mode. All right. So we've covered these concepts. You kind of see where they're going. And now let's talk about kind of grouping these elements together, bringing them together, and what that means. So the first and kind of like easiest construct to work with here are groups. So in Figma, groups are a way to just kind of loosely associate items together. It's not a formal way of putting things together, but if you're making an illustration, if you are kind of quickly riffing on an idea and you want to put two things together, you can group objects. So I'm going to show you very briefly how to do that. I'm going to come down here. Let's make sure I'm working with my move tool, I'm going to click, I'm going to add a rectangle. Let's add some text. Right, that text looks great. Let's change up my font. I'm going to go back to Enter. And let's say if I just needed to keep an association between these two objects, I might keep it, I might break it, but by selecting them, you can see I can click, drag, I can select both of those objects. I can see their representation on the layers. They have been selected. And now I can put them into a group. The easiest way to do so, if you right click, right, you could see a bunch of options here, right? And this is another thing too. I like visually demonstrating these things. I would normally use a shortcut key, Command G or Control G on Windows. And what that means is it's going to group that selection. It's going to take those objects. You'll see here in the layers panel, what that does, you'll see that group and they're now nested inside of it. Now, the key difference between a group and other structures is that you can't necessarily define the width of the group. The width of the group is defined by its children. So these are children elements inside of the group. Okay, so that's going to be the first structure they're going to work with. Now, if you want to break that group, you want those objects to be independent. Once again, there's a number of different ways you could do that. When you right click, you can ungroup, right? So ungroup right here, Command Delete. What I do is I usually hit Command Shift G. Usually does it. There you go. Command Shift G is usually my shortcut for ungroup, but there you go. When I right click, I can group the selection. Now when I move them around, they're together. I can right click and I can ungroup that selection, and now they're individual objects. The next thing we're going to talk about is frames. So I see someone asking, with auto layout, is grouping still used? With auto layout is a frame. So right now I'm going to be talking about frames. Auto layout is just a frame that keeps its children elements automatically arranged. Now, one of those children elements can be a group. So you want to think of them as two different structures. A frame, now, what a frame is kind of like a predefined set. You need frames for prototyping. When you add a frame to the canvas, I'm going to add this frame right here. This is a structure to keep elements organized. You might be familiar with them from other applications known as like artboards. So I believe in like Sketch, Illustrator, Photoshop, they might be referred to as artboards. Here in Figma, they're known as frames. It's the F key to trigger them. And when you select and create a new frame, you will see the property here to change it to any device that you wish. So I can click an iPhone 16 Pro Max layout, and these are going to be the viewport dimensions for that device. So here we can see I've created that. Now, when I press F and I click again, you'll just see that it creates another one. There have been some recent updates to frames in Figma, which make creating new frames a bit easier. So by pressing F and hovering over this frame, I can easily create a new one that's at the exact same dimensions to the right of it. So by having that frame, you created the new structure, and what you can do is populate your frame with other objects. So here would be the beginning structure of your design. Now, when I select the frame and I move it around, you'll see that all of those child nested elements are inside of it, very similar to the group that we were just working with. The difference between a frame and the group is that you set and resize that width and height. There's a difference between scaling an object in Figma and resizing an object in Figma. So when I'm changing the width and height of the frame, I am only adjusting the size of the frame. I'm not inherently changing its contents unless I am doing other things. There's a concept in Figma known as constraints. And what that means is you tell any object inside of the frame how to move. So if I have another rectangle in here, by the way, if I want to duplicate this, Command D duplicates it, adds a copy, and I can move around. So Command D is going to be, or Control D on Windows, is going to be your fastest way to duplicate something. So here I'm just working with objects inside of the frame. If I resize the frame, nothing happens. And the thing is you need to tell objects within the frame how you want them to resize. That's going to be this little window over here under constraints. You get that to pop up by clicking this little toggle. By the way, if you do not see labels here, click on this little ellipse menu. Sorry, wait, where is it? I believe it's up here. Yeah. So click on the little zoom up here and enable property labels. So if you've been working in Figma, you're new to Figma and you don't see labels on your design, on your windows, if this isn't making sense for you, like, I don't know what these numbers mean, you can come up here to the zoom and you can enable property labels and you can see what's there. So this window or this little area here is referred to as constraints. And what it does is it tells an object that is inside of a frame, tells that object inside the frame how to behave when I resize. So right now you'll see left and top, right? You'll see these little like dotted lines. That means it's constrained to the left and top. If I change that to right and bottom, you'll see those little dotted lines change. And what that means is now when I resize my frame, it's constrained to the right and bottom. So when you're working with frames, you're not scaling an object, you're just resizing a window. And if you want objects to react to that, to respond to it, kind of like the first notion of like responsive design, if you're familiar with the concept, what you do is here, that constraints panel is going to be integral for you to instruct how you want that object to resize along with that frame. So that's going to be one of the things, is that a frame is a construct for your device, right? It's like your artboard. If you're drawing or if you're making a social media post, you're going to set the width and height of your frame, you know, to social media size. So if I come here to frame, I keep scrolling down, you're going to see Twitter post, Twitter header, Facebook post. These are all different sizes that you can use that you can then design towards. So frames, very important. Now we're going to start going from freeform design to even more structured design with this notion of components. Okay, so what we're going to do is, how do you delete a frame? Select the frame, press delete, and then it's gone. So any object that you have on your canvas, you can select it, you can press delete. Now, if the object is locked, I can right click and I can then lock or unlock an object, making it undeletable or uneditable for the time being. I see another person. How do you get to constraints in the frame menu? You get constraints to show up when you select an object inside the frame. So if I have this rectangle, I'm not going to see constraints for it because it's placed directly on the canvas. When I select that rectangle and I bring it into that frame, then I will see the constraints become available, right? So there they are. When I bring it outside, those constraints are gone. Once it is brought inside of a frame, then those constraints are there because it's the way that it constrains to that frame. So it's not going to be available when it isn't available. All right, we've covered so much. We basically covered a number of different primitives of things that you can add in Figma. Now let's start talking about how you begin to put them together. And by the way, if you don't see those constraints, by default, it might be turned off. You're going to look at the position area, then you're going to click on that constraints, and then that will toggle on. So if you're working in UI3, you don't see constraints, click that little toggle, it'll become available to you. All right, so now we're going to be talking about components. I know I'm trying to answer all questions and get to all the things. So next up, we're going to talk about components. A component is an element in Figma that is reusable. In this file, I have a number of components that are used to construct that phone profile that I showed you earlier. Now, in this file, I also have a link to an activity. So if I click on this, it'll take me to the activity. This is an activity we put together that walks you through the construction of a profile. So if you're teaching, Figma to a class and you're looking for a fun activity to engage folks, check out this activity, call it the auto layout icebreakers. And what it is it's a collection of these components that can then be edited and put together. I'm going to show you how a component is used, and then we'll talk about how to make it. So in Figma, you'll notice that right now we're currently in the file, but when you click on assets, there's going to be assets. It's like a library. It's a collection of components. Components are items that are reusable. So this way, you're not just making the same button over and over and over again in Figma. You're going to design the button once and then use it across a dozen pages or hundreds of pages across many files. So what you do is you build a construct. You build a little design construct that can then be reused. So here in this file, when I go to assets, I can see these components that I defined within the file. They can be dragged and dropped immediately from this assets panel, or you can click on them and you can see a preview of the component before you insert it into the file. So can we add the auto icebreaker link? It should be in the community file. You'll be able to click on it right from there. So here, right, this is the component. I can add it. Now, the way that components work is there's a main component and then there are instances. So by dragging this in, I could see this component and it's just a collection of a lot of those primitives. So you'll see here I have a shape, right? I could even change the color of that shape. Here I have some text. I can change the text that's there. I could say @Miggy, right? Here is an image. I can command click on that and come over here. I can upload an image from my computer and I can place it right in there. And I'll show you other ways to place this. So a component is not only something that you can add that is reusable, but you can then override its contents, right? Certain things you can override for use. So the definition for this, if any component that you're working on, you want to take a look at it, right here, after I've inserted this, I can right click and let's go to the main component. And you can see all of these other different options here, right? I could swap instance, I could detach instance. I want to go to the main component. So here's the original definition for it. It's actually just sitting inside of another page inside of this file. When you work at a larger company, you can publish this file, or even with the education team, you could publish this file so then those components are available in other files. We can cover that in a later workshop, or you can look up component publishing in Figma if you want to find out more. But for now, I'm going to go back to here and we're going to talk about building your first component. Okay, so here, let's talk about building your first component. I am going to draw in a bit of a rectangle, and I'm going to add a bit of text. Let's change that up. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to draw an ellipse. Let's make a little avatar component. There we go. I have an ellipse, and I'm going to say, username, right? So this is going to be pretty simple, pretty easy. So I'm going to have these two objects. I'm going to select them. And over here, I'm going to have this create component option. So I've selected those objects. And some of you watching who are probably familiar with Figma, you're like, oh, I know a better way to do that. There's so many ways to do this, right? None of them are wrong. Some are just might be a little more optimal than others. But this is the most basic component you can make, where I've drawn out this text field. It's set to auto width. I have this color, this shape here. What I can do is I can actually click on its fill and I can make it an image fill. And that'll give me like a nice little checkerboard to help let others know that it's a placeholder image. I can select those two objects and I can come here and create a component. If you want to see more options, you can always increase that like little window. So this window could be made a little bit larger. There's component. I've made a component. right? Once you've made that definition, you'll see these 4 little diamonds show up, and you can give it a name, and we're going to call this avatar. So here, now that this has been defined as a component, any copy of this, right? So I'm going to just create a copy of this. I'm also going to drag one from the assets panel. Let's see. Here we go. Here's my example page. I could drop in another one. So now that these are all instances of the main component, if I change anything here, right? So if I change this to Miggy, right? These now update, right? So these have now updated, and you can see that when I change something here, right? So I could change this large and small. It's updated here. Now on the instance, if I change this to Alex, I change this to, let's see, we have Jay in the house, and who else do we have here? We have Lauren. And so you could see that I'm able to override those. So these components can then be arranged and used as needed. Now, when I have a particularly long name, if I put in my full name, Miguel Angel Cardona, right? You might notice that the bounds of the component no longer react, right? It's like it's a fixed element. And that's where the concept of auto layout is going to come in. And we'll be talking about that in just a moment. But what I want you to understand here is that these components are then reused. So if I make any changes, I can make changes to the font size, right? So I could change the font color or the font style. I could change the font size, and all of these follow suit. So if I were to have a circle, I make it as a component, and then I have its instances. Any changes to the circle that I make is then relayed to those instances, but then these instances can then have their own overrides, such as color. However, the original sort of bit of that component then affects it, right? So it's this is the original, this is the main component, and these are instances. Now, when you start thinking about structured design as you create, so here we go, the copies, any copy from it, right? So you can hit Command D, right? And this is a copy. You'll note that this is a main component by the main component icon, but also any component that you make in the file will then become available here in the assets panel. So as I am adding these, right, they're available here, and then you can drag them in. So then they become available. So sometimes it takes a second for that to update. But here is where you're going to see those instances. So as we start thinking a few steps forward, these components here, I'm going to go back to my file. I'm going to click on this page where I put in these components. Now, this is going to be a bit advanced for today, but the way that these components are made, it also includes a number of different properties. So when these are defined, there's a concept in Figma known as component properties, where you can begin to define fields. So this is the title field, right? This is the description field. You can define and create variants, so like slight different changes, and other fields. So we're not going to cover that today, but what I want you to see is that by having these definitions here and then being able to work by pulling those elements in. So in my assets panel, I can go here, I can go to my activity components, and I can begin to add them in for a design. So I can grab a header, right? And the header, with the header selected, there are those component properties that were part of the definition. So I can even make changes here. I could say at Miggy, right? I could change this to Miguel Cardona. And the next concept that we're going to learn, somebody already mentioned it earlier, was auto layout frames. So as I'm freeforming this, I'm able to move these about. I'm just going to darken up my screen so you can see this better. So as I'm moving these, right, I'm able to move these about. And this is still freeform. They're still individually on their own. However, if I want to keep them together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select them all. And over here, there's this auto layout option. By clicking use auto layout, what that does is it keeps them inside of a new frame. So here you'll see an auto layout frame, and I can control the gap, the spacing between them, or I can move them up and down. So let's kind of walk through that quickly. This frame is now an auto layout frame. You can notice it's changed by the icon. The auto layout frame is going to keep objects grouped either vertically, or I can group them horizontally, right? So I can group them horizontally, or I can group them vertically. It's a bit of a weird shift right now, but so now they're arranged vertically. I can select, that color, and I can move this up and down. So what auto layout does is it keeps a structure for the elements that you're currently working with. Auto layout, much more of a deep dive concept. There's a video currently on our YouTube that's going to be a big deep dive. But for today, all that you need to be concerned with is that you can keep objects and keep their relationship together, and that auto layout is nothing more than a frame that keep those objects together. So if I was to add in more text, right, it then pushes down the other objects. Without auto layout, right, what would happen is, I would be putting this together, and as I'm trying to add in more text, the text overlaps, and I have to physically move this down. And then as I'm adding more text, I have to move this down. When you have auto layout, you select all the objects, you press Shift A, or you enable auto layout over here, and you could choose the gap between them. And then as you remove or add content, that text will then flex. So at a minimum, for you to think of the concept of auto layout is that it's a framed and it keeps objects organized. So here, what we do is we have these components, right? Those components are then put into an auto layout frame. So you can see that even as I try to I'm trying to move this out, it's like, no. I see what you're trying to do. I want to keep these objects together. I want to keep them friends. They're going to be able to move up and down. And then we're going to be able to customize that information. I'm going to show you another trick for easily updating text. So if you have a text field, and it's inside of a component, and you find yourself wanting to click it, you want to select it, you want to get into it, right? All you need to do is press the T key, the type tool, and you can select any text field. So I'm going to show you that one more time. Press the T key, right? You can click the text field, and you can type in whatever you want. So if you're ever in Figma and you're encountering someone else's components and you want to select, press T, and you click and you can type it in. Now, the next thing that's also super easy. So let's say I start rewriting this. So I'm going to say at Alex. To move to the next text field, I just press tab, right? And then here I go. Alex. Right? And I want to go to the next field. I press tab. Oops. I know. Why is it not tabbing over? That's different. There you go. It was working before. There we go. So I select this text field. I hit tab, 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 right? So as you're working, if you need to edit the text, hitting the tab key will easily let you navigate. So by using the components with auto layout, it gives you that ability to kind of quickly move between them and edit things a bit more freely. So even if I have like a design like this that's beginning to already start to come together, press the T key, and I can press tab, and it'll go between those. All right, I'm going to show you one more great shortcut before we begin to talk about dev mode and close out for the day. Absolutely correct. Tab, and I think it's Shift Tab. Shift Tab will go up to the one above. Yeah, so tab, 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 Shift Tab to go up. The next thing I'm going to show you is how to easily place a ton of images. So I've showed you how to create a placeholder image. Basically, create any shape, go to the fill, right here is the image option. It creates a placeholder image. You can upload the image from your computer, but I'm going to show you how to add many images at the same time. So when you create these little image placeholders, or when you're working with a shape, you can use the place image function to add in images into Figma. So if I want to begin to populate this piece that I have here, right? I've assembled the components, I've put them together, and now I want to populate it. I can go to File, up here, File, and go Place Image. The shortcut key is Shift-Command-K, Shift-Control-K if you're on Windows. I use this all the time. I love this. So I hit Place Image. It's going to pull up my file browser. You might not be able to see it through the zoom, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, by holding down the Shift key, a whole bunch of images. I'll show you kind of what that looks like in a sec. And so I held down the Shift key, I selected a bunch of images, and now if you look at my cursor, I got the number 7, and I have a preview of one of my images, right? So I got number 7. Now I can just click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So all you need to do is select on the shapes, and it populates those fills. I'll show you that one more time. I'm going to hit Command Z. I'm going to undo all that. And so we're going to go, let's do the quick actions menu that we used earlier. Type in place image, choose place image. I'm going to select a bunch of images from my computer. It's going to populate my cursor with them. There's my cursor. I can see a preview of one of those images. And now I can click on those placeholders, and those images are now populated. Those images are currently populated with a fill behavior. However, there are different types of behavior. You could choose fit, that will attempt to fit the entire image there. But then there's also crop, which allows you to change the crop and position of your image within that frame. So they're placed in the order that you selected them when you go and select them from the file browser. So I think here, this is what my extra screen looks like. I know you said you couldn't see my extra screen. So this is what it looked like. I selected one, I held down the Shift key, I selected them all, and I chose open, and then that made it open up. All right, so the final thing that we're going to talk about today, now we've talked about primitive objects, right? Then we talked about structures to organize them using frames, groups. Then we talked about even a bit of auto layout. So an auto layout is going to be a way that you might have all of these other objects and you want to keep them together. I press Shift A, it puts them inside of a frame. I can call this profile. And this profile, all I really need to do is change the padding. They're all together. If I want to select this, I can move this object up to the top. And if I have more text, right, you'll notice with auto layout components, you'll see that everything then kind of pushes itself down. This makes designing much easier because you no longer have to manually move things around. They're basically ascribed kind of like their stack order, much similar to the way things work on the web. Now, with all of those concepts put together, as you begin to work on your designs, we want to start thinking about dev mode. So with your education plan, you're going to have full access to dev mode. You enter dev mode by pressing Shift D. You can click this option down here. And within this file, I already have a bit of annotation demonstrated here. And in dev mode, it does two things. It allows the designer to kind of evaluate their designs. It allows the designer to begin to see how the designs might be expressed as code. So if I was to select this text here, you can see that it's showing the text frame, and it's also giving me certain properties. When I come over here to the right, I can choose CSS, and I can begin to see some of the underlying representation of that code as it would be expressed to develop for the web. What's important here is that you begin to see the properties of the things that you're constructing. So when I select my text, I could see font family, instrument sans, the font size normal, font weight. These are all things that the developer needs to understand how to translate the design from visual to code. Yes, you can use this mode as a student. It's offered free for y'all. It's great. So as I'm moving through this, I can also begin to highlight things that I find most important. So down here, there are two options for you as a designer. There's an annotation tool. And I like to use the annotation tool as a way for me to have a better understanding of what it is that I just designed. So in my looking here, I could see, oh, okay, cool. All right, we got my font, we have my font size, right? We have the line height. And now you might even see these things being expressed in a value. Right now it's 16 pixels, line height 150%. You can even begin to change those values. I know there's a number of you out there that are like, I prefer REM, root M values. It's a common way to express things relatively in CSS code that's based off of font size values. So I could change that to rems, and you'll see that the font size is 1 rem, which is based off of a root of 16 pixels. So if I go to my unit settings, here we go, and I can even choose to only apply rem values on text properties. If you're unfamiliar with rem values, take a quick look. Look it up on Google. Basically, it's like a root font size that helps determine other values in a CSS document. But I just want to show you all that this is one of the most requested values as described by developers to better develop their designs, because they would rather use a relative value. It's better for accessibility, etc. So when you're in this mode, right, you can have a better understanding of how to annotate what it is that you're working on. And then these annotations can get surfaced. You can also use ruler measurements. So for designers, maybe you want to define like the distance from here to here. And this is going to be expressed as 3.5 m. I would also say that you could just double click and type in whatever value you want, right? So I can go here and I could say 20%. So as I'm going in here as the designer, if I want to override and be very specific, the whole point here is to demonstrate your intent to whomever you may be working with, right? You wouldn't set that as 20%. You'd probably say, this should be like 2 rem. So even if the value isn't properly expressed, when they are in dev mode, they can have a better sense of what it is that you wanted to show, to demonstrate as that value. And basically what we're talking about here is, how do you go from sort of objects that you're just drawing on the canvas to really thinking about the underlying intent of your designs? So even here, if you're just thinking about that spacing, what is that? So the value of 1 rem, right? Once again, if I change that unit setting right here from rems to pixels, right, it's going to change back to pixels. I could change it back to rems. Now it's just 1 because it's 16 pixels. 2 rem would be 32. Like 1.5 would be 24. So it's just a multiplier value. So you can use this to kind of express that. I could say 4 rem, right? And then this way, as a designer, you can better communicate with the developer your intent. And so one thing that's pretty cool here, even if you have an effect like a drop shadow effect, here on this annotation that can be made. The last thing that I want to demonstrate is that the reason that components are going to be helpful, and I just want you to understand it as like an abstract concept, something to look up for later, as an ideal that you're going to strive to in your Figma learning journey. So here, when I select this component, what's good for developers is that they can evaluate overrides. So I showed you that you can kind of change overrides in the component, and then they're then provided with a visual diff, right? The way that a developer would want to see that expressed, when they make changes to their code. So I could see that it was previously the font size was 16 and now the font size is 24. So as you're working in Figma, when you're working with components, when you are working in a structured manner, the intent is there. And then when you go to develop it, right, those values can then be expressed to a developer, right? So I could see this in CSS, right? I could see this as iOS, Android. So you can actually change what this is expressed in. So if I go from CSS to Swift UI, right, when I select things, I will get different outputted code. as you become more advanced, it does provide the opportunity for developers to add their own custom code and for that to be stored. But for the time being, I think that this is a good way to begin thinking about, the purpose of Figma and what makes Figma different than other tools. And that's going to be the ability to go from that like free form state, creating graphics, creating symbols and shapes, and then taking that into components when you're ready to begin structuring it, to then being able to relay that to a developer. And then the last thing I'm going to show here is, because this is currently expressed as an iPhone 16 frame, when I go to the prototype window, I can go into those prototype settings and I can actually preview this in the device. So I can choose iPhone 16 Pro Max. I can even change the background and I can hit play here for like a simple presentation view of it. Or I can go and fully present mode, and kind of demonstrate, how this might work on a design. So the only thing that I did was to make sure on my frame that I have scrolling turned on. So you could turn on vertical scrolling. That should work. In a later workshop, we will cover more advanced prototyping, and how to create interactions. But for now, I just want you to see, just that beginning, right? It's like the free form design and how it lends itself to some of these other concepts. All right, cool. Do we have any questions, Alex?
We do, and I think we're only going to have time for two or three.
All right,
So
cool.
if you can stick around, stick with us. We're going to get through all these questions. I'm also throwing in the chat a feedback form. We'd love to hear what you thought about today's session and what ideas you have for future sessions. We do these workshops every single month. Miggy, over to you for questions.
All right, awesome. First thing here, is there a way to resize text with the mouse by dragging the corner? So I mentioned earlier that when you have a frame, or even when you're like working with text, you're kind of like working with the bounds of the text, right? So you're not actually scaling your text. What you want to do then is use the scale tool. So the scale tool is the K key, right? It's down under here. The scale tool, it'll bring up a little panel over here on the right that actually allows you to scale objects by a multiplier or by width and height, and allows you to choose an orientation point by which you wish to scale it. Right. So in Figma, because it needs to cover responsive design, and by responsive design, I'm talking about, like objects responding to a window size, the same way that you resize like your browser window, you're not scaling your browser window. So in order to scale in Figma, what you do, any object that you may have. So if I have this text, I have I have this text, I have a rectangle, you select them, go to that scale tool. The scale tool icon will appear different too. You'll see it has this like left, right, and that'll actually let you scale things. So in Figma, the concept of resizing versus scaling is different. And it's because you're fundamentally designing for applications where you need to think about different device sizes and window resizing. Cool. All right, so the little number one inside of the green circle. So that little number one inside of the green circle just lets you know that you have annotations, right? So that there are annotations that are currently on that design. When you click on them, you're able to enter into dev mode where you can then see those there. Let's see if we have another one. I'm just going to draw a line through that. When creating a design of prototype, should we use auto layout from the beginning? What I would do is like get more comfortable with auto layout. I think it can be jarring for folks who don't know what's happening. So when you're working with auto layout, if I was at say, just 3 rectangles and I select them and I turn on auto layout, there's a number of different properties that are here that are at play, right? So there's resizing, such as hug contents, or if I select the rectangle inside or the square inside, you'll see there's fill container. So what fill container means is that it'll respond differently. So before you begin using auto layout, what I would recommend is you become comfortable with the different properties of auto layout. So this way you understand what the frame is doing. So then you don't have unexpected results. So when I switch to like a vertical versus like a horizontal layout, right, there's going to be different expectations and it changes based off of that resizing. Is there a way to get a text box to wrap around an object? Currently, we don't have text box wrap, but I will take that as feedback for the team. And how do I set up a responsive frame with all of this content responsibly fitting the target host screen? That's a much more in-depth answer. Oops, I think I was talking to Siri this whole time. So here, that's just one thing. Setting up a responsive frame, use auto layout, use constraints. Every frame is going to be a little bit different. But it's just a matter of thinking about what you're trying to accomplish. So with auto layout, you can define minimum and maximum values for how much an object squishes or stretches. So what I would recommend is look on YouTube for one of our previous auto layout workshops, and that'll give you a much better sense of how to begin using these things for responsive design. And then last thing, someone asked me, how do you edit the circle to make it like a graph? I'm going to draw the circle out. You hover over it. There's a little dot. That's the arc tool. You drag that arc tool. Once you do, you'll notice a few more properties here. Those properties are going to allow you to adjust, the ratio, the start point, and the sweep of that object. A student asked me recently, they wanted to make like a little health bar, and they were trying to apply the corner radius to do so. The best way to make a health bar or like an activity bar in Figma is to drag the ratio all the way to the edge. What you want to do is swap the fill and the stroke. So Shift X is swap fill and stroke. And now that you have a stroke value, then you come over here and you apply round endpoints. And then that's going to give you a lot nicer activity sort of tracker bar. So what you could do with that is I could make that red. I can copy and or Command D duplicate it, bring that down in size, and change the color, right? And then I can Command D duplicate that, make that larger, and maybe that one is the yellow one. And so what you want to do is you want to make that a stroke value, and then you're going to have a much nicer sort of activity UI. And once again, if you want to like keep that all together, I can right click and I can say frame selection. And what that do is it's gonna put it inside of a frame. And then now you have a frame with that object. If you want to reuse it, you make it into a component. And then now you have this component. And within the component, you could still change those values, and you could have a bunch of different ones where you get to keep the sort of foundational aspect of the rounded corners, but then you get to have your own copies of them. So if you do need to make changes, you can make global changes here, but then you can have those overrides to have additional iterations on the instances of that activity bar. And with that, we are done. Make sure y'all fill out Southwest Airlines. Make sure you fill out the feedback form. We'd love to hear what you think of these workshops, so then this way we can better provide new ones. Be sure to register for next month's workshop as well. Appreciate having you all here today. Be sure to check out that community file. We will be sharing out the recording for this. Big thank you to Alex. Alex, do you have anything else to say?
No, great job, Biggie. This was such a fun workshop. If you want to join us, you can always go to figma.com/events to see what's going on next. We do these every single month, and we can't wait to host you again. Thanks for coming, y'all.